everybody. I'm Blinn.
I'm Michael.
This is Legally Speaking, and today we're going to talk about trust myths.
So common myths associated with trust.
So I think we're going to mainly be talking about what's called a revocable living trust, which somebody creates during their lifetime. And it's revocable, so that means it could be revoked, it can go away. Exercise control over it during your lifetime, and then when you pass away, when the person that created it passes away, it becomes irrevocable. But we're going to be talking mostly about the revocable portion of it while the people are alive. So what's a myth you hear a lot about revocable living trusts?
Trust pay higher income tax rates.
Okay, well, that's true, but when somebody creates a revocable living trust, that entity, as long as they're alive, is disregarded for purposes of income tax.
So you don't file a separate tax return for that irrevocable trust. Revocable living trust, correct?
Right. You file your income tax returns just as you would normally once that trust is created.
So the income generated from the trust is then claimed by you on your personal individual return. Your income rate is whatever income tax bracket you are in for that year.
Right. And that's the case as long as that person is alive. And so there's not any additional tax for that. Along those same lines, I think one of the things I hear a lot is, well, I don't need a trust. The trusts are for the uber wealthy and things like that. And I don't think that's necessarily true.
No, I think it's a way, it's essentially a business entity that you're setting up, that you're running yourself. Some people like to set up an LLC, or any other type of corporate entity. I think a trust does similar things. If you and your spouse or you alone want to operate with your assets not in your individual name, you most certainly can put them in a trust. That trust has no annual income tax filing if you're passing through all that income to you as an individual. So people can do it for convenience, and you don't have to be uber wealthy to be entitled to a trust.
I think it does a couple things. It can avoid probate, which will be another myth here in a second. But the other thing it can do is it can avoid multiple probate if you own assets in different states. So I've used them a lot for that reason. If I own an asset in Missouri and I live in Illinois, and it's real estate that I own over there, if I die, I'm probably going to have to probate a will in Illinois, and I'm going to have to do an ancillary probate proceeding in Missouri to deal with that real estate, and that can be cumbersome, and that can be avoided with a trust. But one of the myths I think that stems from that is a trust avoids probate no matter what.
Right. And I think along those same lines is, if you put your assets into a trust, you can now apply for Medicaid, and you can go into the nursing home and have government pay for your care because all of your assets are in a trust. Another common myth: just because your assets are in a trust, as Blinn said, this is a revocable living trust. That trust, you exercise control over it. You can amend it, you can revoke it, you can add property to it, you can sell all of your property to the point of exhaustion and using it for your individual benefit. And if you have that control over it, then that is an asset for Medicaid planning.
One of the things it's not going to do is it's not going to avoid probate if it's not funded correctly. So you have to retitle assets into the name of that revocable living trust if you want that revocable living trust to own them. So it doesn't happen automatically. We do that with deeds for real estate, or retitling bank accounts, or retitling investment accounts, or naming the trust as a beneficiary on life insurance, that type of thing. And if that's not done correctly, you're kind of adding a step, because usually what will happen is you'll have to probate a will to get assets to the trust, and then you'll have to distribute the trust, which, if it's funded correctly, the trust can distribute right from that individual.
So when you say funding it correctly, does that mean you have to go out and you have to get people to put in some type of cash so that you can then go and say, all right, I'm funding my trust? That's not what you're saying by funding it. You're saying taking the assets that you own right now in your individual name and you as the individual are transferring those assets into the trust, then you're still the trustee. You're still the one that has control over those assets, which again is back to the same point of that's why you're claiming all of that income generated from those assets on your individual return.
Right, and that's along the lines, I think, of one of the other myths that I hear a lot is it's really complicated. Well, not really complicated, but it does involve some work, I think, and I think it forces you to kind of get organized. If you're going to appropriately fund it, you need to know, okay, here's everything I own, here's how it's owned, etc., and get all that transferred and get all that listed of here's what I own, here's what needs to be dealt with, etc., so you know it's all now owned by the trust. And I think that there's more work involved certainly while you're still alive versus here's my will, I leave everything here. That's going to just happen after you're gone. You're taking on that job yourself, I think, for the most part while you're alive, and the expense and the time of doing that. But it can make that transition after you pass away much quicker.
So after you pass away, what happens to the assets that are owned by the trust? Do they automatically then pass according to somebody's will?
They would pass according to the terms of that trust.
So, and do you have to take any step to create a new trust entity?
Not in Illinois. So you would nominate a successor trustee. That person would be vested with authority automatically on your death, and then they would do whatever it is they need to do, whatever that trust says. Here's the next step. It could be hold them, it could be distribute them, it could be sell them, whatever.
And I think that goes to the common myth that trusts have to be complicated. They don't have to be. You can put all of your assets in the trust, or some of them, and you can say, at my death, I want these two beneficiaries, my kids, I want them to sell everything and split the proceeds equally. And they wouldn't have to wait a 6-month claim period necessarily in some situations. They wouldn't have to go through the cumbersome process of probating an estate. They have the authority to step into the shoes as the original trustee and essentially carry on with the business and distribute the property if that's what the trust directs.
Right. So in Illinois, there wouldn't be any court involvement necessarily unless, one of those things wasn't done correctly. But it's usually a pretty smooth transition, I think, if it's done correctly and funded correctly and set up the way that it ought to be. I mean, there's certainly some complexity to it. I get that there's a lot of words in there. Yeah, well, that's by necessity, but a lot of that is the powers of the trustee and what they can do and what they can't do, and are they going to be compensated, not be compensated, that type of thing. So there is some complexity to it. There's some work to it, but to say just blanketedly that it's complex, it's expensive, things like that, I think some of that is short-sighted.
I agree.
So if we can help anybody or answer any questions about that, let us know. We are around in this new year, 2023. The Illini coming around, looking better, going on Friday.
Going on Friday. Tom Izzo comes to town, so that'll be a fun game to watch. Usually that's a good show between two pretty tough Big Ten opponents.
Should be a good game.
They both played last night. They both won last night, so.
Both coming off a win, but coming in Champaign, that's a tough place to play.
Very. On a Friday night.
It'll be rocking. All right. Well, we'll see you guys next time. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Take care.